blows my mind. And I'm pretty excited to hear, for example, about Augusto's exploits and his follies in the industry that he works. And then hopefully Mario steps up. If you're going to talk, Mario, I don't know, but I think it's just such a great opportunity. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. When I kind of felt around for what I should talk about, I didn't want to just turn it into a resume of, high points or personal highlights, but I think inevitably it'll become that a little bit. But I think I just wanted to start with a little bit of background first. So hopefully you can see all the slides and so on. And if anybody is not, just let me know. But I throw Donahue's picture on here because nice. I think out of almost anybody at ACS, he had the biggest impact on me. And I'm sure for many of you, we had great teachers. We had some bad teachers, but I think we could probably all agree that somehow Donahue just had this sort of mystique and ability to touch our hearts in a way that others couldn't. And it was really strange that in 1991, I graduated from university and got married soon thereafter. And then I kind of warned my wife. I said, we're going to go back to Bolivia if that's okay. And she said, let's go. So she got a job working with Peace Corps. And I managed to get a job working at ACS, which was really bizarre because, as Augusto already said, half the teachers were people who had taught us. And I think I truly shocked people like Christina Sheehan, Mrs. Sheehan, who hated me, I'm sure. And who else? Esther Artiela and Miriam Karpovics and all these people who, 7 years earlier had been my teachers. And so to go back was very bizarre and surreal, but it was also, a huge privilege. Donahue was still there. It was his last year being alive. And there was one other guy too. I don't know does anybody here remember Wolfgang Schuler, the photographer?
I'm still in touch with Wolfgang.
Oh, are you?
Friends,
that's awesome.
My husband, and we are very much in touch with Wolfgang.
Well, you know what? I would love you, Claudia, if you could get in touch with him and let him know that I'm mentioning his name here because he was one of those guys who, through high school, was a mentor, and he taught me about photography, and he had this great. I'm going to swear here if you don't mind, but this is just quoting Wolfgang, and he goes, "If you're going to do journalism, don't fucking aim low, aim high for the big magazines and the production companies." I sounded Jamaican there for a second, but anyway.
I will let him know. My quote with Wolfgang, like I said, we became friends because my husband and him are friends. And I always laugh and I tell him, I remember him telling me, "You're never going to amount to anything." So I always give him grief. So I'll make sure to tell him that.
He's awesome. That'd be great. And I think like many of, for so many of you, Donahue's death was a big deal. And I'm trying to remember if it was 96 or 97, but I'm sorry, 93 or 94. But, I can't say enough about what I learned from him as a human being and and later as a teacher, looking back and remembering really how calm he was. He almost never raised his voice. I can't remember him raising his voice. And especially the play production and presentations that he made were so fun. And I mean, that's really what, brought people like Augusto and I together, I think, and others who were part of that, people like Joyce and Galen Sweeney, who I don't think we've heard from yet, but others who were part of Bernie Wendy and Rolando and all these people who were part of that importance of being earnest and other ones. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. That's kind of nice to honor him, and I think we do that by getting together like this. But the gringos who became teachers at ACS, we went out and did the first thing that was stereotypical, and that was to buy a Toyota Jeep. And the Toyota Jeep allowed us to get out into what so many of you already know about Bolivia, and that is, it's such a beautiful country. And, when I left high school, it it really tore me apart to leave Bolivia. I don't know what it was about it. You know, obviously my family is still there and my sister grew up there, but you know, there's something about moving around the countryside that is unique to the rest of the world. Even if you go to Peru, it's different than Peru. It's different than any other place that you'll travel. And, you know, even like, for example, that picture on the left, if you can see my cursor, you know, we used to go on these little tiny roads down into places like, you know, the Apolobamba range and camp in these weird little places. You know, and this was with who you might remember, Floyd and Gloria Hall, who taught most of us PE. And they were incredible travelers and absolutely fearless. And we used to go camping up at Ilimani and, you know, Mururata and all these different places. And, you know, just the absolute beauty of the Andes was so special. The Yungas, though, I don't know what it is, but something about the Yungas, I think in another life, I was maybe, I don't even know, something in the Yungas because it has a very special place out of anywhere else in the world that I've been. So anyway, I just, you know, that's where the adventure really picked up. That's really what I'm getting at here. We went to Sajama. I don't know if anybody's been to the Sajama volcano, Sajama National Park. I mentioned Apolobamba and the Llanos de Mojos, like the Beni, going to the Pando, like all these places. Each one's so unique and so absolutely mind-blowing. If you haven't traveled in Bolivia, you need to. It's you know, maybe you could get stuck in the cities, but really the beauty lies outside of those places. In addition to the cities themselves are amazing. It was also a time that I started writing for magazines like the Bolivian Times, which was sort of a small English newspaper that you might remember. I started a website. It was back in the early days of websites, but Bolivian Geographic, which is still online as a Facebook page. And then I worked with Hilary Bratt, who's out of England, with Bratt Publications to produce Backpacking and Trekking in Peru and Bolivia in 1990. There were different editions and we had lots of fun making those. So that was sort of an introduction to publishing and that world. This picture, by the way, is taken from, where's that place where they brew wari? You know, the beer wari?
In Oruro.
It's Oruro, right? Just outside of Oruro, and it's taken from the town, looking towards the Salar de Uyuni.
Correct.
Spectacular.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And like I mentioned, the halls became sort of our best guides. And there was barely a corner of Bolivia that they didn't know. And they showed us all kinds of weird secrets. Like, for example, they talked about these things called chulpas, which of course, many of you know what they are. But these were, the tombs of usually the Inca noble people. And
Mummies.
The mummies and all that kind of stuff. And we would go way the hell out, up in the Altiplano and kind of hop from one chupa to another. Or they would show us caves that weren't touristic, and there were cave paintings inside. And they made us swear to secrecy that we wouldn't tell anybody about some of these locations. So that was something that was very special. And here you can see, Pam and Craig and my wife Tanya, and then the halls here. And we used to go down into the Yungas, and they would show us roads that people didn't drive anymore. They were kind of overgrown and so on. So anyway, that really piqued my sense of adventure, and that was awesome. They were just awesome. One of the greatest things was, you might know in Cochabamba, they have the caves where the huacharos, like the birds, the oil birds they're called, live, and they're nocturnal birds that travel by night. And the halls were very avid birders, and when we went down to the Polobamba, they had us climbing all over the mountains. They're looking for caves with these huacharo birds, and we saw them at night. We never found the cave, but we saw them flying in single file and making clicking sounds because they travel by echolocation. As we were bathing beneath a waterfall that came from a hot spring, it was just an amazing experience. And these are the kinds of things that the halls did. I always thought they were really boring in high school, and I was wrong. So from Bolivia, we moved to India in 1996, and Dave Freeman, who is on right now, he came soon thereafter. And this was a school on the left here, located in sort of the first range of the Indian Himalayas. Hundreds, at the time was a 150-year-old school, 170-year-old school now. And a beautiful oak forest surrounding it. And if you ever wanted to live the true Hogwarts existence, this is what it was like. You had this forbidden forest all around you, and then the school in the middle, and an absolutely beautiful place. One of the things that was ironic or funny was that this picture here is all over, like right now, marijuana, like pot, grew all over the hillside. So you can imagine these students who are at this boarding school, we had to try to keep them away from the pot growing on the hillside. Well, that didn't work out so well, but we would, these crews would go out and gather all the pot and then put them in a huge pile and burn them. And it was so funny because the teachers would somehow always find out where the pot burning was going to take place. And they'd be taking these deep breaths as they're sitting there watching the pot burn. It was a strange place. And on the bottom right, you can see the chain of the high Himalayas. On the other side of that is China, or what is, what I call occupied Tibet. And just spectacular places. And it's where I learned how to film and edit. One of my first big gigs, I guess you could say, was filming and photographing the Dalai Lama when he came to visit. And what was quite cool was that he has this entourage that he travels with, and they make about a 6 to 8 foot radius around him. They're kind of like security monks, I guess you could call them. Kind of like what Francis is wearing right now. A lot looks the same. And I was allowed inside of that circle. And what's so interesting about the Dalai Lama is that he makes eye contact with you all the way, like all the time. Like he'll look at different people, and it's this sort of strange sensation that when he looks at you, maybe I'm romanticizing this, but it's like you're the only person at that moment and you matter the most. And it was something that everybody commented on who had a chance to meet him. It was in India where I learned about a place called Arunachal Pradesh, which is a remote Himalayan state in the northeast of India. And it's closed off really from the rest of India, and you need special permits to go, and that comes into play in a minute here. So this is where Arunachal was located, or is located. You still need permits to go in and visit there. And all along this border, if you can see my cursor, is the Indian Himalaya. The part where I traveled first, and I went with a guy named Sammy De Pasquale, who was a fellow teacher, we traveled up into this area in the foothills. And it was so spectacular because what makes the state very unusual is that it's completely tribal still. And there are 13, maybe I think 16 distinct tribal groups that occupy this state. And they've been protected by the restrictions. So they live a tribal existence, and they have managed, for the most part, to retain so many of their traditional practices. So that really appealed to me, and it was just amazing to see what these people looked like, So on the left is a lady, she comes from the Apatani tribe. It's called, and they're well known for their nose plugs and their chin tattoos. The nose plugs, the legend has it that these women were tattooed and given nose plugs because men from other villages kept stealing these beautiful women away before they had nose plugs and tattoos. And so they felt that the nose plugs and the tattoos made them ugly enough that nobody would want to steal them. And so, or kidnap them. And so that's what they tell, that's the story they tell, and that's what they've stuck to. In another part of the state, you get women from the Laju community, and they have these kinds of facial tattoos. And everywhere you go, what's so spectacular is that everything's made out of bamboo, almost everything. So you can see here the touch, like the roof is made out of bamboo, and the walls and the floors. And it really made you realize just how versatile a plant like bamboo was, and still is. So anyway, just really, really interesting. And it was the first time I also heard of another tribal group called the Wancho Nagas. In 1997, just after the trip to that place that I just showed you, Arunachal Pradesh, my daughter was born, little Akela, her name is. And it was such an awesome change to our lives. And the only scary part for us, I mean, aside from she was born in a one-room clinic with during the monsoon rains, the power was out and there was no running water or anything. But aside from that scary aspect, she was born with a congenital anomaly. And so we found out that either, we would have to get special medical attention, or she might, she had a real risk of not surviving. So because Canada has universal health coverage and it was expensive in India in the private hospitals, we decided to move back to Canada. And the reason I show you that is that, those experiences came out in a book that, like a nonfiction book that I published back in 2016 about those experiences. And some of you may have seen that online, but so we went back to Canada, and we stayed there till about 2005. And I went back to teaching for that time. But, by about 2005, I was feeling pretty burnt out. And I thought, you know what? I really miss Bolivia. I miss the media stuff. And I decided to go into filmmaking full time. So we created a company called Art of Adventure. And I was doing a scouting trip in the country of Belize in Central America, which Pam and her family know quite well because they have resorts there. But while I was in Belize, I get this phone call, and it's my brother-in-law saying that National Geographic is called and they want me to call them back. So I tell them to F off because I thought he was joking. So it turns out that National Geographic had called and they wanted to know about this place called the Yungas Road and the Carretera de la Muerte and all this kind of this wild place that has the highest deaths per mile in the world. And they were doing a show, planning to do a show on the world's most dangerous road. Da, da, da. And so I said, yeah, I know about the road. I've been on it maybe 50 or 60 times, and I'm no expert, but I love that place. Rio Selva and Chilumani and San Bartolome and all these places. I remember. Hopefully, some of you remember San Bartolome, our trip down there. Probably you don't, because most of you were drunk most of the time and stealing oranges from the orchard next door. But anyway, so one thing led to another. And one thing led to another, and in 2007, I took a National Geographic crew to Bolivia to film there. Now, one thing is, some of you might recognize this guy. Who's this? Anybody recognize him? Guy in red? That's Sergio Bolivian, who graduated, 2 years before us, I think? 2 or 3 years, but anyway. He's a well-known photographer.
1981, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, so 3 years. And he had agreed to help do the logistics for the crew and the shoot. Now, one of my favorite memories is looking, that if you look at this spot, you probably recognize it. Some of you will recognize it as the Cumbre on the way to the Yungas. And here you have Yatiri, who's like a holy man, doing a chaya, which is for the people who don't know what it is, it's like a ritual blessing for safe travel, especially. And that was spectacular to watch. And the best part though was, as soon as he finished, you hear this bring, bring, and there's this phone call, and he pulls out his cell phone and he says, I gotta go. I have another appointment. And so anyway, it was the modern Yatiri, and you see them on Sagaranaga Street and other places. But the Yungas was everything we expected it to be, with the waterfalls coming across the road and the views of Mururata, like this one here. Now, one of the things that they wanted to do was interview me about my experiences growing up in Bolivia. But, the one memory that kept coming to mind was our trip to Chilumani and San Bartolome. I think we were grade 11 or grade 10.
Juniors.
Juniors, so grade 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was such a fun trip. But what I remember, I don't know, people were pretty drunk leaving La Paz already, but the micro or the bus or whatever, I think it was a micro, but I don't know if you remember how close we came to going off the edge. And the bus driver, you know, it was raining on the other side of the mountains, and he slams on his brakes, and then we almost, like, one wheel was just on the edge. And then, I don't know if you remember, but we jumped out of the back. We had to open the back door and pull the bus back onto the road. So I told them that story, and they said, "No, we should do a reenactment of that." And so I called ACS up and talked to the principal, and I said, "Hey, let's get some real ACS students, and let's get them to reenact this using like a micro." And so, you know, aside from doing aerials and filming the craziest part of the road, we did this reenactment, which was hilarious. And I mean, I don't think the bus we had was quite that nice, but you can see they had the camera strapped to the outside to show the steepness of the road. And there was one point where they had to fake, you know, this bus almost going off the cliff. So that's what this was here on the bottom left. And then the bus got stuck, so we had to push it back up the hill. And it was so much fun. And the best part was that all the kids from ACS, half of them were like smoking, and like they just thought it was, you know, another Saturday night. But they were great, and they helped a lot. So I'm going to try to play this. If it's not working or it's really choppy, just stop me, somebody. But this just gives you, it's just a little trailer for the documentary that we came up with. It's a little dramatic, but it was fun to do. So have a look.
The Yungas Road runs 40 miles from the lowlands of the Amazon jungle to the Bolivian capital of La Paz at an elevation of about 12,000 feet. This route is cut into the eastern side of the second highest mountain range on Earth, the Andes. This crucial lifeline from the Amazon jungle brings goods like tropical fruits, coffee, and cocoa leaves to markets in the capital of La Paz. The Yungas Road is a roller coaster of twisting dirt, rock, and mud, turning every trip into an adrenaline-pumping adventure. This road is considered the most dangerous in the world in terms of deaths per mile, claiming up to 200 lives per year. For all travelers, the Yungas Road is a path into the unknown, marked by danger at every blind curve. Travelers driving this road face a danger equation created by the confluence of three factors: sheer topography, extreme climate, unstable geology. When these combine, the result is the most dangerous road on the planet. But drivers who survive are treated to one of the most breathtaking drives in the world. Canadian Jonathan Derksen knows the Yungas Road's deadly beauty firsthand.
Well, I've been on the Yungas Road about maybe 50, 60 times since I first came to Bolivia. You never know what's going to happen.
February 1983. As a teenager living in La Paz, Derksen and some friends traveled the Yungas Road from La Paz down to a jungle retreat in the small town of Chulamani.
A group of friends and I, we rented a bus and we headed down to the Yungas. We were laughing, singing, and having a great time. Not even paying attention to the cliffs that were on either our right or our left.
As the driver navigates the Yungas Road's hairpin turns, the bus comes within inches of driving off the road. This is the most obvious peril facing every driver on the road. The first factor in the danger equation, the topography of a sheer cliff face. On one side lie vast rocks, ranging from 20 feet to 3,000. On the other is a cliff wall reaching as high as the eye can see.
So anyway, that was the trailer they used when it first came out in 2007, I want to say. It's so dramatic that I don't like it. Like, it's like Canadian Jonathan Derksen, like drivers who survive. I never said that. But anyway, they needed to get viewers. And so, I wanted to go walking through the marketplaces and saying, look at all the produce. And this comes up from the Yungas. And, they weren't interested in that. They wanted sheer topography, landslides. And so there's one place on the way where the landslide's always coming down. I forget the spot, but you have to go through there pretty quick. Well, instead, they got me set up with a piece of plexiglass.
Jonathan,
Yeah,
el velo de la novia.
Is that what it's called?
Maybe it's
That's what it's
Chispipata.
called.
Yeah.
That's the waterfall there.
It's close to the waterfalls, yeah.
Chispipata, maybe, which is the dangerous place.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's right around that area.
El velo de la novia se cae cada vez camino al sur de Chulumani, el otro es al norte a Coroico. Jonathan is called el velo de la novia.
That sounds about right. So
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, so after this experience being on the road, let me just jump ahead here. I got this, you kind of build a reputation, and the idea was that you can be seen as, let's say, a guy who can take a crew into a certain kind of environment, like whether it's political unrest or something like that, but you're the guy who can get it done. And so Discovery Channel got in touch with me, and they wanted to go to India, and they wanted to go into areas that had strong tattooing traditions, especially among tribal people. And so that got me into a line of work that was the very best. Like, my favorite work in the world was scouting for filming expeditions. So I would go in by myself, and you're getting paid basically to explore an area. The guy who was going to narrate the show that we were doing, which was called Tattoo Hunter, that I was scouting for, is a guy by the name of Lars Krutek, who is a tribal tattoo anthropologist from the Smithsonian Museum. Great guy. And anyway, when I finished the scouting expedition, you can see some of the pictures here. Like, for example, here in the bottom left, I don't know if you can see it on your screens, but that's a rat. And so we were eating jungle rat. And you can actually, if you're able to zoom in, you can see the teeth in its mouth. And when they fed this to me, I said, okay, what the hell, I'll just eat it. And so I ripped the head off, and I was gonna throw it in my mouth, but the guy who was serving it said, no. You don't eat the head. The head of the house eats the head. So he ate the head, and I had to eat the rest. It's the only time I can remember where I could, the food was just sitting like right here in my mouth. I couldn't swallow it. It was brutal. These people had really beautiful tattoos as well. And this was a local shaman, like a holy man, who showed me his spells and how he would fight with a spear and so on and so forth. It was really spectacular work doing this scouting stuff. But then, India has a lot of tattooing cultures, and I had heard about these guys called the Wanchos. And just before I carry on though, like here, just again, you have these women who are so beautiful, but they were ashamed of their tattoos because, the rest of Indian culture looked down on them as tribal people. They weren't part of this, the so-called urban populace. So you might be able to see, right along her head here, you see the scar running down her face? That's where she actually had a piece of skin removed to take out the tattoo. It's very painful. She said it was so painful that she decided not to remove her chin tattoos. This lady here, on the other hand, on the right, she had these giant nose plugs, and she loved her tattoos. She was so proud of it. A few years later, I see this picture of this lady in Ripley's Believe It or Not, or Guinness Book of World Records. She has the largest nose plugs in the world. And I had this picture of her, and I thought, okay, I didn't know that at the time, but nice coincidence. So anyway, really spectacular people and places. But I was told about these guys called the Wanchos, and they said, that's the tattooing culture that you need to visit. They are super remote. They've been practicing their tattooing for, they are headhunters. And I'm thinking, why would I want to go and visit headhunters? But they said, it's supposedly amazing. So I weighed my options, and there was one other negative thing though, and they said, there were no, but like my contacts, they said, we can't help you get there because there's an insurgent rebel group that is trying to get their independence from India, and they're very violent. So when you go in there, you run a risk of meeting these guys. But I thought, okay, well, you know, I'll do a quick in and quick out and should be fine. So I helicopter, I don't know, it was like, you know, a few months later, but I helicopter in to this place. And it's an old Russian helicopter, and they land in this old airstrip, and then a Jeep takes me up. I organize a Jeep rental into the mountains, and these are the people that I met. These were the Wancho people, and they lived exactly how they might have, let's say, 100 years ago. You can see their tattoos here. I took these with infrared film, or in this case, infrared digital camera, and that makes their tattoos stand out quite a bit. And you can see just how distinctive they are. They were amazing people, and they had these buildings called morungs, where they had, I didn't see much evidence of the headhunting until I went into one of these buildings, which were just filled with skulls of the people they had stolen heads from. Basically, it was the idea of the headhunting was you would go to a neighboring village and kill your enemy, take his head off to show that you were brave and that you had actually vanquished that enemy. These guys were all warriors, and the lady on the right, she was a queen who was the only person in the village who was allowed to tattoo. So this was the lady that I sat down and spoke to, and she agreed to be part of our documentary. But the hard part was, she didn't know what filming was. They didn't understand cameras. And so I had to explain what filming was and what a camera was and how it worked and what Discovery Channel was. And that was an interesting lesson to try to give. I know that, we were going to go about half an hour, so I can stop at any time, Zugo. You can just, send me something. But, I don't want to bore you guys with all these details, but it was.
I say keep going.
Please
Okay.
keep on going. Please
Okay.
keep on going. And whoever has to go or do whatever, everybody's free to go. but
Please bore us.
Okay.
No, keep going, John.
Keep
You're
going
doing
all
great.
the time you need.
All right. So thanks,
Super
guys.
interesting.
So in this scouting expedition, I came across this man right here. Where is he? Right here. Pongsa, his name is. He was a local official, obviously a guy with some weight, some political clout. And he also was the only person who spoke English and was educated in the village. So they introduced me to him. And this was his family during festival time. This is called Oria Festival. And during the Oria Festival, they celebrate the local spirits and all this kind of stuff. And people are just hammered on opium and alcohol and local millet beer and all these things all day long. And they carry around with them these homemade muskets, these guns. And when they're excited, they fire the muskets into the air. I was terrified. But they were such beautiful people, and they took me to their special log drum building. Like, they had these buildings where these 40-foot long log drums that they would communicate to other villages with, depending on what you pounded out. And so here's this comparatively tall white guy trying to keep the beat with these guys who are masters at drumming. And I kept wondering why they were laughing so much. And then they just said, "You have no rhythm." I thought that was kind of insulting because, you know, I like to think I'm a musical guy, but apparently not. I was pretty nervous though, because at night when I was sleeping in these huts, you could hear gunfire from up or down in the valley. And that's where the rebels were. And supposedly the Indian military had sent out some scouts to fight against the rebels just down the valley. So I was a little nervous. And an expedition leader and fixer, which was my role, it was my job to try to get the permissions for Discovery Channel to go back. Remember, I was just scouting. We didn't have a crew at this time. So it took a year, almost a year, to get the permissions to go back to this place with a film crew. This here, on the left, top left, is Lars Krutak, the tribal tattoo anthropologist. This is Toka Wangam, the emperor of 7 villages. And I thought, emperor, yeah, right. But he was truly an emperor. And they saw him as the king. And he would have, you know, these special thrones like this in the middle here. And his mother beside him, she was the tattooing queen, they called her. And so everything went through him. And he had become emperor because his father had committed suicide. And so he was emperor, but by default, and he was only 26. And he had this huge responsibility over about 4,000 tribal people. And, you know, it was so interesting to meet somebody who was so singular in his focus. You know, there was just no silliness about him, if that makes sense. I'm about 90% silliness. Being around somebody who was 100% not was a real chore. And go. Same, right? So anyway, he had married his first wife. There's lots of polygamy in that area, but this was his love wife, he called her. And she was just beautiful. And we traveled around. And what I'm getting at is that I was able to get this crew back in, and we started filming in 2008. And Lars Krutak loved what he was seeing, these tattoos and so on. Here's that guy, the political attaché with a civet. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It looks kind of like a raccoon, but they ate everything that moved. And, you know, they wanted to show us how it was prepared and all these things. And the warriors, man, they would come out of the woodwork, and these guys would wear these necklaces. And for every little brass head that they have on their chest, that's how many men they killed and brought the head back to the village. And then they also had these tattoos. You can maybe see them very faint here, but on his shoulders and his chest. We met this wonderful lady, and she wanted to tell us all about her tattooing experiences. And the women are actually the most tattooed in this culture. And for every rite of passage, for every step in life, they get a tattoo, and starting with their legs on the left, and then moving up to their chests and their bellies. The cross on the belly was when they first got pregnant. And so they would tattoo that across the belly when it was extended. And this lady told us about how she tried to run away when they wanted to tattoo her because it was so painful. And they strapped her down and they made sure she got her tattoos. And she said part of her curse was that she was part of the noble family and they get the most tattoos. So she said in her own language that it really sucked, but she loved her tattoos when all was said and done. We were able to film a young girl getting tattoos, and it was a beautiful ceremony. Nobody else besides women were supposed to see this ceremony, but they gave us special permission with the help of a shaman who granted permission. And we got to see, maybe for the first time in 20 years, how they put together the needles for making the tattoo, what they call a mallet, which they actually puncture the skin with ink on it to make the tattoo indelible. Then they, they created their own thread, and this young woman was selected to get the first tattoo in many years, and she was about 19 years old. Our gift to her for getting the tattoo, because it costs money to do these things, because everybody gets fed and so on, was that we were going to pay for her university every year. And so we've done that. We've actually seen her come through university. She was an orphan, so she would not otherwise probably have had that opportunity. And I really like Discovery Channel for that, because they stood by, you know, what they said, which was sincerity and respecting the people that they filmed amongst. Here you can see they're putting the ink, or they're rubbing it so that the ink becomes permanent. And then you can see to the right of that, if you can see, I don't know, you can just see that picture of the little tattoos that we had started, or she had gotten done at that time. There was also, on the bottom left, this huge longhouse building, like 1,000 came together to build this giant structure. And you can see it's completely made out of bamboo and things from the forest. That was really amazing, so impressive. And they always have to sacrifice a water buffalo to feed the villagers that are helping. And so it's very communal. There was no plastic, or very little. And so all the cups were made out of banana leaves. You can see them drinking out of their banana leaves on the right there. So this is just a little 1-minute video of Lars Krutak talking about the tattoo. This will just give you a little idea of how we filmed.
The Queen has told me that a girl is going to get tattooed at this house. I gotta tell you, I'm really excited because I don't think any outsider has ever witnessed a tattooing ceremony take place in this village. Before the big event, the Queen is going to make all new ink and tattooing tools. Once all the needles, or sai, are ready, they're slipped between a piece of bamboo sticking out from the stem of a palm frond and tightly wound into place with cotton. This has got to be the biggest mallet I've ever seen used in tattooing. Throughout Southeast Asia, most indigenous cultures practice a form of hand tapping. Now, if you look at these needles, they're set up in clusters of 4. There's 1, 2, 3. It looks like there's 3 needles in each cluster, and they're put together in a linear arrangement. And I've noticed that the Wancho's tattoos are basically linear. So this is exactly the kind of tool that you would want to use.
So that just gives you a little taste of, you know, what we were filming. And maybe one of the most remarkable things about this film shoot was that nobody understood filming, like I already said. So that meant that if something was going to happen that was a tribal ritual, they just started doing it. They didn't sit there and say, where's the crew? So I would have to run over to the cameraman and say, get your ass over there, start filming, man. He'd say, well, I'm having a break. I'd say, well, okay, give me the damn camera. I'll go film it. So he would run out, he was all mad at me. And I'm saying, these people don't care that you're filming. They don't care that Discovery Channel is here. They're doing their thing. So get your butt out there. So we were always running around, and I lost 10 pounds in 7 days, I think it was. I wish I could do that now. I'm actually just gaining 10 pounds every. Pop out here just for a minute, like I'll leave it on here if that's okay. I just wanted to tell you how this shoot ended, and I'm going to abbreviate it because, you know, we're getting on in time here. But so we had a finale, this big mock headhunt planned to film, but I had kind of like my Secret Service agents who I'd hired to be informants to me. So if anything dangerous was happening around me, they would come to me and tell me. And so while we were filming, while we were filming a man harvesting opium sap, like what they make heroin out of too, a guy named Fortune, who was one of my informants, comes to me and he says, they always call me Mr. John. He said, Mr. John, the rebels are on the move up the valley. And I said, shit. Okay, so what do we do? And he goes, I go, how long till they come here? He goes, well, they found out that you have cash in hand and that you're paying people, and they want a piece of the action. Before we arrived, we had heard that the 13 children in the village where we were staying had been kidnapped as recruits for the rebel army. So kidnapping was nothing new to them. And so we took this very seriously. And I talked to a guy named Pablo Durana, who some of you might have seen the movie The Dawn Wall recently. Anybody watch that? Let's see. Anyway, he's an Oscar-winning filmmaker now. And in those days, he was a 26-year-old guy, kind of getting his, learning the ropes, but really talented guy. But anyway, he was one of the key crew members. And I told him, and he said the same thing. He goes, shit, you know what? We're going to have to tell our director. Her name was Jennifer. So we finished filming the opium harvesting or the sap harvesting. And that night we tell Jennifer, and her face turns white. And she says, well, how close are these rebels? We're going to have to call Discovery Channel. And what I didn't know until later, she told me later, the first thought that went through her mind was, I'm going to get raped. Like she was going to get raped. And it didn't even cross my mind that that would be her thought. And of course it makes sense. And she was terrified. And so the next morning we were able to call Discovery Channel by satellite phone. And they said, you're going to have to pull the shoot. We'd been there for 2 weeks. And they said, you're going to have to pull the shoot. And I'm thinking, it took us a year to get here. I was being selfish. And I was thinking, you know what? We could hire the Indian military to come and protect us. The emperor had earlier said, if the rebels are anywhere nearby, our people are going to lay their lives down on the line for you. But I told him, I said, no one's going to die to film a documentary. That's just not in the cards. So the decision was made to pull sooner than later. And that really was a hard decision for all of us. So I'll keep it on here, but the problem was we had this mock headhunt to film. We had to come up with an alibi to leave because they said they would protect us, but we didn't want them doing that. So we came up with this idea that we were going to say, we were having problems with one camera. So we were going to say that because the camera was broken, we couldn't carry on with the shoot. We'd have to leave. And we were nowhere near a center big enough to get the camera replaced. So the next morning, that same morning that we called Discovery Channel, that was the morning that we were supposed to film the headhunt. We go down to where these warriors, there are 8 warriors, waiting to do this headhunt in the jungle. And it's this amazing thing that they do. And I'll show you some pictures in a sec. But when Pongsa, the political official who was doing our logistics, he found out it was like somebody had pumped him full of bath salts, and he went ballistic, absolutely crazy on us, fell on the ground like in convulsions and crying and screaming. And I was worried because, every morning, this was a guy who, smoked opium. And so
I lost audio completely. I don't know if you guys can, if everybody else can hear.
I can hear, everybody can hear?
I can hear.
I can hear. I'm good.
Vuelve a conectarte, Ignacio. Vuelve a conectarte.
I can hear babies.
I hear babies. It's nice.
Who's babies?
granddaughter.
I want to see babies.
John,
Who's got granddaughter?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Oh my God.
We're almost done here. So where was I? Okay. So this guy goes crazy on us.
I can't hear anything. I don't know if you guys are sorry.
No, it's okay.
Maybe it's my connection.
I'll send him a chat. Go ahead, John.
Okay.
I can hear fine.
Okay. This man says to us, the first thing he says to us is, I wish you'd never come. I can be a kind man, but I can also be a treacherous man. And he started to threaten us. And he said, you're going to tell the warriors that you can't film. So he leads Pablo and I to this hut where the 8 warriors are waiting. And when they find out, they all start shaking their spears at us and their guns, saying that they're not going to let us leave. And I didn't really understand the strong reaction, but what I later found out was that they had spent weeks preparing for this. And so I felt so awful, you know, that we couldn't continue. So, but it was getting dangerous and they were getting very physical. And so Pongsa, this guy, was beside me, and I was trying to think of, because I was getting worried. Pablo had this butt pack full of Indian money, like thousands of dollars worth. And he pulls it out and starts to pull money out saying, let's just pay them and go. And I said, no, God, no, put that away, you idiot. It was dark enough that they didn't see him do it. And so instead, I had researched this group, and I knew that they were recent converts to Christianity. So I grabbed Pongsa's hand and I pulled it to my forehead and I said, Pongsa, be a way you can forgive me for the, you know, what's been happening. You know, like, are you a Christian man? And he looks around and he goes, yes. I go, do you believe in forgiveness? And he goes, yes. And so I said, can you tell the warriors what I've said? So he tells them, and the warriors all stop yelling. And I said, what did they say? Because they said something to him, and he goes, they want me to stop yelling at you. And so to see, you know, somebody, a visitor from the outside, come in and do that sort of, I mean, I guess it was an act of submission, right? It made them uncomfortable. And they were like, okay, forget it. It's not that big a deal. But so Pablo had the great idea to, we had our cameras, our digital cameras with us. So we said, look, we can still film you, just not with our big cameras. So let's film you. Let's do this thing. Well, then I realized another mistake I made, and that was, you're always supposed to bring a gift of small whiskey bottles for the warriors to drink in any time you visit warriors. I'd forgotten them. So Pongsa turns to me and says, you're not leaving. You're not leaving now. That's an insult to us. So it was back to square one, but no yelling. So I said, can we send a runner to get, you know, the whiskey? So we did that. He allowed that. We had this huge meal. They had this meal prepared. They said, we might as well eat. So we eat, and then the whiskey shows up, and oh man, I'll tell you, thank God for whiskey, cheap or expensive, because all I know is that these warriors, when they started drinking, the whole mood changed, and then they smoked opium together. We as foreigners didn't smoke opium because you can get arrested in India for being a foreigner. Yeah. I breathed very deeply, just like up in the mountains with the pot, though. And anyway, so these guys then took us on the most incredible romp with Shakyu. On the left, you can see how they were dressed. And it was clothing, but they had these special cane belts and special homemade cloth, and each guy had a different headdress, and they had their homemade guns, and they took us on about a 15-kilometer hike or, you know, rush through the jungle. They had this head hunting basket in the middle, decorated with monkey heads and the horns from Goral sheep, like wild sheep. And they had this hut that they had built, and inside was the pretended victim, the person they were going to kill. And so they had this whole fake body, this wooden body in there, and they pulled it out and they cut his head off. And up in the top right, you can see this little head in this guy's hand. And it looked like something out of Lord of the Flies. It was so amazing to watch. And here you can see it a little bit closer. One of the other warriors is carrying it. And so we had this all on camera, and we were just thinking, shit, we missed this. We could have filmed this. We could have done it, but it was just too dangerous. By that evening, 30 children more had been kidnapped, and the rebels were within 4 kilometers of the village, according to my informants. And so I told Pablo, you know what, we finished filming, you go. Because they still didn't want to let me go, because we hadn't compensated people for the time they had spent away from the fields. That was their livelihood. We promised we would compensate. So I spent the next 6 hours by myself with these and everybody else who came out of the woodwork, and paid them from Pablo's money belt for their services. And it was fair to pay them, but Pongsa, the political guy, he wanted to save face because he was saying, well, if you're going to leave, I have to make sure that you're leaving with, you know, me not in the what do you call it, like in trouble with my people. I need to make sure they're compensated. It was a fair comment. So anyway, that was my brief hostage taking, or you know, time in captivity, I guess you could say. But in the end, they were actually quite soft-hearted people, and you know, just with an edge, I guess you could say. So we ended up having to, sorry, I'll just keep it there. We had to pull out, the Jeeps were loaded up, and we took the one road out back to the nearest town. But before we left, the emperor approached me, and I've got it up on my wall here, but he presented me with a quiver full of arrows that he had carved during the film shoot. And he had traded with me a Swiss Army knife for a crossbow, but as a gift, he gave me these arrows for the crossbow. And it was such a wonderful and you know, touching gesture. And I didn't really know what else to do, but I gave him a necklace that I had. And so it was kind of like this brotherly thing. And he was such an amazing young man. And we've been in touch since 2008 when it was filmed. So that brought that to a close. And I'm just going to finish very briefly with what's been going on more recently. And Sugo, you talked about, you know, I go with students places and we film and do what's primarily charity work. So my production company called Art of Adventure, we film for free. It's pro bono work. But the idea is that we help an organization like, let's say, La Senda Verde and the Yungas, which is a wildlife rescue mission. They don't have the money for advertising. So we go in, we do, you know, professional filming for them. They accommodate us with food and a place to stay. Then we build the marketing, you know, the video for them, or the film. And I just wanted to close with, it's just like a couple of minutes if you're okay. But this was edited by one of my crew members who's a German filmmaker now. And he's very good. And it's more of a visual thing, so you don't have to strain for the audio, but have a look. This is what was our trailer for the series of short videos that we did for La Senda Verde, the animal rescue place.
Illegal traffic of wildlife in general is huge in terms of illegal businesses in the world.
Our mission in La Senda Verde is to rehabilitate and to take care of rescued wild animals, victims of trafficking, illegal trafficking, cruelty, and destruction of natural habitats.
People need to be aware that for every 10 animals that are taken out of their habitat, only one survives. And that one that survives went through a lot of suffering. We need to take care of animals and understand that animals are not objects.
Creation is a wonderful miracle, and life is such a priceless and awesome gift that we really have to take care of. day that we stop receiving animals will be the best day of our lives.
So some of you will have recognized a lot of those spots. And Bolivia is so amazing that way. But one thing I was just going to finish with is that La Senda Verde, who we did this for, they've been hit very, very hard by COVID. And you know, if any of you have visited or whatever, they did ask if I mentioned that we were going to be doing this and I was going to show this, and they said, if you don't mind, can you make a little plug for donations? If you know, they operate solely on donations, and they're great people. So anyway, I throw that out there, and some of you I'm sure have been to La Senda Verde. It's quite a remarkable place. So, but anyway, thanks for your time, guys. I'm going to stop there because I'm way over. I don't know if there are any questions, but I really appreciate the opportunity here. So
thank you so much, John. This has been absolutely fantastic. I think that we're all proud to have shared part of our infancy with such an incredible adventurer. I'm gonna start. I have a question for you. When you were in India, in that school that was 100 years old or something, where did you guys live? Was there a city nearby, or?
So yeah, there was like a marketplace. It was called Missouri. The school was at about 7,000 feet, and it was along this ridge. And then there's this road that wound along the ridge to a town called Missouri, where Dave and others we lived. But you saw how the school is spread out through that forest, right? So our house was a little cottage made out of stone in the middle of that oak forest, and it was called Redwood Cottage, and it was this, you know, dark little cozy place at the same time. And that's where my daughter spent her first year and a half, which was awesome. So yeah, all these little places in the forest. Yeah.
Well, go ahead. Ask. Just open up your audio, guys. If you have to ask any questions, I think it was great.
I'd like to make a comment, if you guys would let me. First of all, I want to thank you, John and Auguste, and whoever had this initiative to start this. As I was listening to you, John, I was kind of emotional, and I am right now, and I was texting my daughter and thinking what a blessing, and I thank you for making us first aware of what a blessing it has been to be a student at ACS and a cougar. I wrote to my daughter, Veronica, who went to school from pre-K until she graduated in 2010, 10 years ago, and said, I'm listening to this Zoom, to this FAK chat, and 36 years later, I'm still learning. And I think that's so incredible. And I'm so thankful that in these COVID moments, I'm on Zoom calls with the office all the time. And as I'm sure a lot of us are, but this felt really worthwhile to me because it brought me back to my roots. And I'm so appreciative that we have our classmates, and again, that we're still learning. And thank God, and I'm so thankful that you mentioned Mr. Donahue and Mrs. Karpovics and the halls, and it made me think back that we've been so blessed and so lucky, and I'm so fortunate that my dad's in the other room, and I'm going to go right now and tell him, Papi, thank you. ACS is not a cheap school, but I am still learning 36 years down the line. This was so enriching to me to listen, and I'm so proud of you, as I'm sure all of our classmates are proud of the work you've done and the life you've lived, John. Congratulations. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thanks so much. And keep in mind that in a week or two, it's going to be the man of the hour, Auguste Birjed. He's going to be talking to us about, I mean, that's what's exciting, is that every experience comes with brand new stories, right? And anyway, so keep that in mind. That's next. That's coming up. Yeah, it's awesome to see you guys.
Great. So glad.
Turn to your cameras, man. Let's see you guys.
Long live FAK.
Claudia, pon tu cámara. Whoever's not sleeping.
Yeah, exactly.
I've had a few cocktails, but acá está mi cara.
Same here.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
John, spectacular. I think you left us all, amazed, and we're all pondering on, and I think we all lived through these adventures of yours. My question is, and thank you again. I echo what Claudia said earlier. And forgive me for moving. I'm driving. I got pulled over by the Alabama State Patrol earlier for holding my phone on the dash.
I'm
He was
sorry.
nice enough. But what's next for you? I mean, you've done it all from an adventure standpoint. I heard you got a production company. You've written. You've adventured. You've been. What's next for John Derksen? Do you mind sharing that? Because I may want to hang on your coattails and join you on your next venture. To hell with everything, and you're showing us what it is to go back to our roots and everything. So enlighten us, John, and thanks. It's great seeing everybody.
Thanks, Rolando. There are a few things in the works. One thing I didn't mention is that last August I went to the Canadian Arctic. It's the last community going north before you hit the Arctic Ocean.
I saw your pictures on Facebook, yeah.
And we went there to film evidence of climate change because the what we call First Nations people, the indigenous people here, they are saying it's very alarming and they want to get ahead of it. And so we flew up there with, again, some ex-students. And that was an amazing experience where, we were welcomed by a community that had never seen us before. And what really was awesome is we took a girl who was from that community and she hadn't been back in 7 years. And so for her, it was a reunion. And, so this weird combination of learning about that culture, and then they're called the Gwich'in people, and then seeing that climate change. So that really got me thinking about how I and others can empower students to seek out these experiences that aren't so high risk that, they won't be allowed to go. COVID's obviously gotten in the way of it, but, even with COVID, there are these stories unfolding that are our lives. And, it's our lives in what would you call it? Our lives in a room, you could say. And so, like you, Claudia, like you, Rolando, and others, I have had to really examine who I am. And with the Black Lives Matter movement, and, I don't know where people sit politically, it doesn't matter. But it's made me rethink a lot of things that I think are stereotypes that I've upheld for years, and wrongly so. So I want to explore that. I want to explore it with students without being, without being political, but being honest and truthful. So I think that will be the next step, is how do I turn it into a channel? I'm already a filmmaking teacher, but, these students have amazing skills, and a lot of them are way better editors than I'll ever be. So watch for that, Rolando. I think that's what you'll see, is kids coming out with stories that before were theoretical and now they've lived it. We're all old enough to say we lived through part of the Vietnam War, or 9/11 or whatever. These kids don't even know what that is, practically. So this is their 9/11. This is their Vietnam War, and these stories have to get told. So.
Great,
Francis.
Thank you. Keep us posted.
I will.
Hey, John, could you post the links of the?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll do that. Can I post to the WhatsApp?
Yes,
well,
absolutely.
Sure. Anyway, even
and
that
to
movie
the
that you
donation site.
Yeah.
Okay, I will. That'd be great.
Francis,
just before I take Francis's question, I was just going to let you know, like at La Senda, one thing that was just a fluke was that the girl that we took along, who was doing the narrating for the series, she, just before the shoot, fell in love and married in secret a guy by the name of Taylor Luan.
Oh.
Taylor Luan is the highest paid left tackle in the NFL. So he had just gotten an $80 million contract for 5 years or whatever it was. But she didn't tell me this until after the shoot. But while we were at La Hacienda, she calls her husband up, calls Taylor up, and says, can you please donate enough for a new Puma enclosure? And so he that night sends the money to La Hacienda and say they had their new Puma enclosure. So it was pretty cool. Like, I mean, to see that kind of,
Wow.
you know, whether it's $5, every little bit was helpful, right? Sorry, Francis, go ahead, man.
No, Matey. It's difficult for me to begin anything I can say tonight. Seeing August, Jose, you, and everybody else, and I just like to say a short bit, snap, perhaps. Yeah? You've lived a blessed life.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You know what? Look, from my heart, all I can say is the following. All of us were born more or less the same year. Yes? Do we agree on that? If not, you're a bloody liar. So, John, thank you. And you know what you've done? Sorry, in my point of view, you fucked it all up, mate. Because
55 and kicking.
You set the standard so high for the FAK Talks that it's just downhill from here. Where do you go?
That's not
Francis, I want a FAK talk from you.
Where do you go? Where do you go from here? I mean, where do we go?
I want to hear your life story.
Absolutely.
I would bore you.
Francis, you know what?
You wouldn't. You're up, Francis.
I think other people would agree that one of the biggest blessings right now is the fact that you're here.
The fact that I'm alive, yeah. Yes, indeed, that is true.
Hey, and this is a safe spot. We can talk about
Absolutely.
anything. Somos hermanos.
¿Tú crees que yo creo eso?
What happens in Zoom stays in Zoom.
Oh, there it is. But next time, I really will be drinking whiskey and not red wine.
Yeah,
I lied.
Chaps, I'm drinking today. By the way, I had a good, listen to this, unbelievable, right? I should not be mentioning, but I had a good Porto, August, this is straight up your alley. A good Porto from guess where? Tarija. Sacrilege, absolute sacrilege. Anyways, John, listen, I think, I'm not sure whose initiative this was, but I imagine it might have been you and August, yeah? But I think it's brilliant, by the way, chaps. FAK Talks.
Yes, that's
FAK Talk. Exactly.
FAK sells.
Quickly, there's a guy named Thomas just joined us. Hi, Thomas.
Hey.
He was one of the guys who joined us in La Senda Verde to film what you just saw. And so he's an ex-student from about what now, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that much?
4, yeah, 4 now.
4, yeah, and
he looks a lot younger than what we do.
Jonathan, by the way, I just want to give you a bit of an interjection, if I might, all of you, that I'm not going to do the next one because it would be, I can realize as a Shakespearean fan, it would be like doing Othello, but being white. So.
Well, I'm looking forward to the next one.
Okay, so.
Yeah. I'll do the other one, but you know what, chaps, it has given me, honestly, an injection of intelligence and being proud to know who I went to school with.
Eso, bien, Francis.
Go Cougars.
You're great people.
Okay, so anybody wants to ask John something else? Or we can talk about whatever, huh? No?
I have 1,000 questions, but I'll ask one now.
Ya se perdió el volumen. Me has hecho entrar esa llamada y se fue el volumen. No entiendo por qué.
John,
Sí.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a very simple question.
Okay.
What if? And I ask that to every single one of us. What if? And I propose a second round of TED Talks next season. First of all, we need to give our own TED Talks. Mine perhaps will be in a week or two. And then the other one is the next season, to go preparing it. Don't know Kardashians, please. What if? And I leave it 3 dots. I propose that as a question to you, John, and to you, August.
Okay, the whole idea is to do this in a week or 2 week basis, and whoever can join, whoever joins. We sort of prepared like a couple to start with. All right, I thought it was great to start with John because obviously would kickstart this with turbo power. I humbly will give the next one, and it will be a totally different scenario. I'll talk about.
We look forward to it.
Absolutely.
Mine will be called Clinton, the King of Spain, and the Moulin Rouge. That's what it's going to be about.
Perfect.
Right? And it's the stories and tribulations of a hotel manager. So I'll share some very interesting, I hope, anecdotes. And
multi-powers.
No headhunting, no rebels, but some kings, some dancers, and some presidents there. So that's what I'm going to talk about, to give a totally, 180.
This is absolutely brilliant. And I just like to this is the last thing I say, yeah? Do you realize, chaps, that the embodiment of knowledge that we're just putting in a bloody hellhole here is
Francis,
incredible.
it's fuck friendship and
Mine
knowledge.
will be, my talk now that August gave it a theme will be how not to get kidnapped over the Gulf of Mexico. Which I was, by the way. So that's the topic of my life.
Tell that story.
Okay, you're third up, Francis.
Okay,
you're third up.
I gave you a bit of a splash, right? Synopsis. 2 million shares of Nova Communications of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. But at that time, the London Stock Exchange was closed. So as I was flying kidnapped in an aeroplane from Miami to theoretically Brownsville, Texas, but I was going to land in Mexico if they didn't pay the ransom. So that's all I have to say for now. Cheers.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned for fancy stories.
Bit of a cliffhanger.
Hence
the hook.
Make sure, Sugo, make sure you record too.
Yeah, this is recorded, okay?
And we want to see slides and pictures, Francis.
I will. I love you all, chaps.
Okay, guys.
Bits and pieces.
All right, you guys, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
John, thank you, mate.
Thanks, guys.
Mate, I love you.
It's great to see you, Marco. Great to see you.
José.
My blessings.
Un abrazo.
Que todos estén bien. Abrazo para todos.
Bye-bye todos.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jonathan.
guys.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Until next time.
See you, John. Great talk. Bye.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.